You're listening to the Fantasy Takeaway Podcast with Murphy Hamilton and Joe Pollock. Proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Podcast Network. Subscribe, listen, take home the title.
What is up, Takeaway Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Takeaway. As you can tell, Murphy's not here today. He was feeling a little under the weather, but we're not going to leave you hanging. We've got coin flips, a little news and notes, an injury roundup, and some cheap dates to round out this episode. Jeff, how you doing, man?
I'm doing all right, Joe. How are you?
Doing awesome. How'd you do in your week one lineups?
Pretty good. So I had one league where I felt like I got pretty badly shelled, but I had the fourth highest score in the league. And I just realized that the guy I ran into had literally everybody who blew up. And beyond that, though, I felt pretty good. 8-2 on the week in my 10 leagues.
Yeah, I think I was 5-3, but I ran into one league where I had the other guy. Like, who starts Marquise Brown in week one? Who does that in a 12-team league? Like, that is bad fantasy. You got really lucky if you do that. You played a guy that played 14 snaps in week one. That's not smart.
I mean, he got high impact snaps. I got nothing. It's sometimes better to be lucky than good, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. In that situation. All right. Well, in light of some of these guys, like we had, you had Adam Humphries as one of your guys for the cheap dates last week. And I just want to talk about whether or not we should be dropping these guys for some of the guys on the waiver wire. So you want to do some coin flips?
Yeah, let's do it.
Coin flips.
All right. First up, just pick one. In a vacuum, it's kind of rest of season, but like basically who is the better flyer? Royce Freeman, Kalen Ballage, or Justice Hill?
Oof, I'm taking Justice Hill. I think that's going to be my guy. So far, I kind of like what I've seen out of the Ravens offense. I know they played the JV defense that is the Miami Dolphins, so it's easy to love in that case, but they've got another pretty decent matchup coming up against Arizona, and they just have enough weapons that do enough things that I expect them to get touches that matter. Maybe not so much right now, but the next 3, 4, 5 weeks, I expect to see his role expand, and we're going to see a little bit more love for Justice Hill.
Sure, I think Gus Edwards is going to end up being the guy that loses snaps in that offense from week one, because it was basically a third split between Hill, Edwards, and Ingram. I think the Ingram and Hill both go up a little bit, and Gus Edwards goes down.
Yeah, I could see him falling off a little bit or just being used as like a short yardage hammer. He'll definitely vulture some touchdowns, and he'll be extraordinarily frustrating for fantasy owners everywhere.
Sure, especially for Mark Ingram, because I don't know if a lot of people noticed, but Gus Edwards got the first carry inside the 5 in that game.
He sure did. I noticed that. I didn't actually have a lot of Ingram shares, but I remember seeing that and giving it a little raised eyebrow.
Yeah, that's scary for Ingram owners. Like, they're feeling great because he had a 50-yard run and a touchdown in that game, but if he didn't have those two plays, that is a terrible day for fantasy. All right, next up, we'll do some receivers here. This one is actually a question that I had for my lineup. So Adam Humphries, Chris Conley, or Preston Williams?
Oof. So, you sent this to me earlier today, and I was kind of thinking about it. We looked at it. I can't get behind Humphries for season long. I can't just stay with him for the rest of the year. I don't know what that offense is going to be. I don't trust it. Conley, I love to think Gardner Minshew is going to be the guy the rest of the year, but I don't know if I trust that either. So give me the bad offense in Miami. Give me Preston Williams, because at least they're going to be throwing it up a lot. And he's got the size and the ability to come down with it every now and again. And if he's just lucky enough, maybe he gets you a touchdown here and there.
Sure. It's totally just a high upside flyer on the backside of my bench. So it was between Conley and Williams for me. Those are the two guys on the wire, and Humphries is the guy on my roster. I ended up going with Preston Williams as well, just because I think there's potential for him to be the clear-cut number one in that offense sooner rather than later. Then maybe week 6, week 7, and he's free. I can drop him if some new waiver wire hotness comes along, and I could see him becoming a back-end wide receiver 2 by the end of the season,
I mean, back-end wide receiver 2 might be a little rich for me. If he does that, I think that's really, overperforming. Like, he's definitely doing some things at that juncture. I think if he's like a mid-level wide receiver 3, maybe even back-end wide receiver 3, that's still a really good year for a guy that was undrafted and was effectively a nobody through the preseason. I like where your head's at. I would definitely take him over Humphries, keeping him as a stash. Doesn't cost you anything. It's definitely worth having.
Same page there. All right, this one is barfy as all hell. Jeff, Carlos Hyde or Raheem Mostert. I don't want either of these players personally, but when you're in deeper leagues, you have to make these kind of decisions at the back of your lineup.
Ugh, I know it. Give me Mostert. I think with the infirmary the 49ers have right now for their running back room, you've got Breida, who is likely going to end up banged up again. I like the guy, but let's be clear, he's going to miss some snaps. I'll take Mostert because he's got enough burst and explosion to be dangerous. Even if he only gets you a few big plays, there'll be enough where that offense should keep him relevant. And, I look at Carlos Hyde, watching him against the Saints. It's not so much the Saints looked that good stopping him or the Texans didn't do a good job of getting him into space. He just didn't look like he had any burst. Even when he got into the open field, he just still looked kind of slow and floating. And I don't know if that's what I want on my fantasy roster because he doesn't give you any big play upside. So give me Mostert. I'll roll the dice on him.
Yeah, I think that Carlos Hyde might be a little bit better flyer in standard scoring because I do think that team's going to score a lot of touchdowns. And I don't think that they want to run Duke Johnson in goal line. So as a kind of flyer in that situation, I'm okay with Hyde. But in any other situation, I'm taking Raheem Mostert. I play exclusively PPR and half point, so I won't own any Hyde. I picked up Mostert on a few leagues.
Yeah, I mean, it's my understanding that PPR is the new standard. So if you're playing in one of them, old-timey like touchdown premium leagues, or if it's a situation where you don't get points for receptions and all that, then yeah, Hyde might be a nice flyer. But you also need to figure that the Texans like to throw that little goal line fade to D-Hop too.
All the time.
And so it's not necessarily a given that he becomes the guy that gets those points. So it comes down to your own scoring at that point. If you're not getting anything for yards and it's all about touchdowns, give me Hyde. If you get points for catches, yards, and all the standard scoring mechanisms that are out there, it's all Mostert all the time.
Totally agree. I like this one a lot better. This is a question I've been seeing a lot in the NFL fantasy football discussion. Chris Thompson or Adrian Peterson?
Ooh, I actually have some AP on a couple of teams I adopted this season. But I think I would take Thompson here. And I look at it just from the standpoint of, I'm assuming it's half or full point PPR. He's going to get you some catches. He sees enough targets and he gets you enough after the catch to be useful. I mean, this is the guy where in 2017, he was basically a back end RB2. And everybody seems to forget that because he was rattled with injuries last year and he didn't really see a ton of playing time. Even with a beat up O-line in Washington and not having Trent Williams and all that, his value doesn't get stung like that the way Peterson does. So I think I'm going to lean Thompson here.
Yeah, I'm leaning Thompson too. And I think he got, I don't have the number right in front of me, but I think it was 10 targets in week 1. So you might not see that if they have Adrian Peterson active. They might decide to run the ball instead of, the proverbial run through the air. But even if he only gets 5 or 6 targets for a guy that I drafted him in a lot of leagues, but I didn't draft him until like the 13th, 14th round. So if he was out there this week, I went and got him everywhere I could. Just because that's a nice safe floor. If he has 5 catches a game, that's great. 5 catches for 30 yards. If he gets a touchdown, makes your week in the flex. Like you like to have a little bit more if you've got a high upside wide receiver, but if you can get a safe floor of 10 to 13 points in your flex from a guy like Chris Thompson, I'm doing it every time.
Well, yeah. And if you went, say, 0 RB in the draft and your number 1 back or number 2 back was Tevin Coleman for some reason, Chris Thompson makes a really nice fill in right now. Especially if you didn't have the fab or you weren't able to get your hands on both Thompson and Mostert. So it's a nice situation for him to be in. And the Redskins are kind of sneaky dangerous on offense because, with the emergence of Terry McLaurin, they have a guy that can now beat you deep. They've got Vernon Davis, who's super reliable over the middle. And then you have Thompson, who can beat you at the first level. So they have receivers at all 3 levels of the field now. So they can't really stack the box up on you too heavily, and they can't really sit back and just give you fat cushions either. So defenses are going to have to make really hard decisions to defend all 3 of these guys.
Yeah, and Chris Thompson could be an afterthought in the game plan and end up with 10, 12 targets if the situation calls for it.
Absolutely.
All right, next one. It's just one quarterback question. It's basically asking if you're buying the Zach Taylor hype.
I'm not.
You're not? All right, Andy Dalton or Derek Carr?
Give me Carr.
Interesting.
I'm going Carr here, and depending on where you go, Dalton's projected to score 1 to 2 more points than Carr. I just feel like when I look at Derek Carr playing against Kansas City this week, because I'm assuming you're streaming your quarterback here, and that was your game plan going into the season. So give me Carr and a shootout against Kansas City as opposed to Andy Dalton with all the O-line injuries, facing what's by season's end going to be a pretty nasty 49ers front four. I'm expecting to see Andy Dalton playing this game from his back. And Derek Carr, he's going to probably have another, call it 275 and 2 type of game.
I expected to see Andy Dalton on his back in week 1 too, though, and we didn't see that hardly at all. That offensive line played really well against a stacked Seahawks front seven.
Well, that front seven is stacked, but you have to understand the roles of each of those players too. You had Clowney was brand new and probably didn't have a full grasp on everything they were doing concept-wise because it's so greatly different than what he had in Houston. And then you still have, Jaron Reed who's suspended, so you didn't see him on the field. You had, Poona Ford might have been the rookie who was in there playing. They're still not at full strength, and their linebackers do drop back into coverage quite a bit. They don't really use them to apply that much pressure. So for me, when I look at basically the second team O-line for Cincinnati, you effectively played a second team D-line in Seattle. And I would be interested to see that game replayed in like week 10.
Sure.
And then watch Andy Dalton play from his back.
Let's see it. I think that zone scheme that they run really helps to disguise some of the problems that you have on an offensive line. So I'm not going to say that this is the worst offensive. It's just the worst offensive line in the league on paper. But there have been teams that have run this Kubiak, Shanahan, McVay style scheme that have really been able to mask that in the past. So I'm keeping my eye on it. I like Dalton better. Maybe not for this week per se, but in a 2QB or super flex league, I think that the upside for Dalton is bigger, especially once AJ Green comes back. Let's jump into some news and notes here.
News and notes from across the NFL.
We are going to do our weekly Antonio Brown update.
Do we have to?
I really don't want to, but these things are a big deal. If you drafted Antonio Brown, you absolutely have to be pulling your hair out right now. I, fortunately enough, didn't get any shares of Antonio Brown this year. I would have if he would have been in the right spot for me. I just didn't grab him. Got lucky. But recapping, he signed with the Patriots. Everything was good to go. We're going into Sunday, and now he's being accused of sexual assault and rape from a former trainer of his. We don't know what's going to happen. He might end up on the commissioner's exempt list while they figure it out. It's just a nasty headache. But Jeff, what do you have to say about this?
I mean, these are really serious allegations here. It's one of those situations where the NFL needs to step in and figure out what's more important right now. Do we put him on the exempt list and keep him from playing, or do we let him play while we accrue more data? There's already a civil suit filed. I don't know enough of the data, but I mean, if there's already a suit filed and there's already enough to take this thing to court on some level, maybe the NFL needs to step up and just put him on a list. And if you've got AB, you should just assume you're not going to have him the rest of the year. Consider him a happy bonus if he does play. But you should be stacking your bench right now with all the wide receivers you can find.
Yeah, go get your Terry McLaurins, et cetera, those kind of guys. I mean, even like the Preston Williams we talked about earlier, if you have to drop a second, third string running back to grab a guy like that, go do it.
Yep.
Don't drop AB. This could end up being all noise. It could be a false accusation and everything could be totally okay. If you can get value, especially in Dynasty, I would consider trading him just because I don't think these headaches are going to be over anytime soon. Generally, I'm just holding and waiting to see what happens.
Well, yeah, you can't sell him right now because you're not going to get anything out of it. When it comes down to Dynasty, I generally try to sell guys as they approach 30. I try to get that peak value at 28 or 29 years old.
Me too.
And get the most out of them. So I actually dealt AB 2 seasons ago, and I was pretty happy with I think it was Joe Mixon and Tyreek Hill is what it turned into.
Woo!
And Tyreek Hill
looks terrible this week, but
yeah, it looks terrible this week. But for last season, it helped me out quite a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of the situations. If you have him, you're kind of stuck with him. You can't trade him. You can't drop him. It's just a dead roster spot. So you need to be, trying to figure out if you can add another serviceable wide receiver to the back end of your roster.
Totally agree. The other piece of news that I have here is the Demaryius Thomas trade to the Jets. I don't think it's particularly relevant right now at this moment, but I do think that later on down the road this season, DT could have some DFS value, maybe some emergency spot start value, because he could very well be the red zone option in that offense. It might be Chris Herndon. You never really know with these things, but he's a guy that I wouldn't pick him up, but I would keep my eye on him as we're going down the stretch here. What do you think about DT, Jeff?
I mean, I'm not afraid to use him twice against the Dolphins.
Yeah.
But there's the thing we have to remember here is that Quincy Enunwa just got put on the IR. And I don't even think it was with designation to return. I think his season's done with his neck injury. So he's going to step right into a starting role. And with the way Robbie Anderson got bottled up and the way they're just, it seems like unable to get him to expand his route tree and be effective, DT could end up getting a lot of targets funneled his way, especially, until Herndon comes back. And, because Crowder can't keep getting 14 targets a game all at the line of scrimmage. 17 targets. Yeah, 17 is ridiculous. And they're all within like 2 yards of the line of scrimmage. Like that's not going to be a winning game plan moving forward. They have to move the ball more than that down the field. You've got to get 8, 10, 12 yards downfield. And I think Demaryius can still give them one more season of that.
Yeah, I do think that he is coming back from that Achilles still. So we're not going to see him he didn't have that much burst anyway. He's more of a go up and get it kind of guy.
Right.
But I think that it's going to take us a while to see him actually produce in this offense, but he might get some of those jump balls right out the gate.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
All right, not much news on this one, guys. So let's jump in to the injury roundup.
Injury roundup.
I'm going to try just a little bit different format than we usually do for the injury roundup just to see how it goes. We've got players that are listed as out. We're going to talk about them. We've got players that are listed as questionable. Those are guys we're going to really dive into if we have any information on them. And then the likely to play guys, we're just going to roll right through into our cheap dates. So first up, we've got the guys that are out. We've already talked a little bit about Tyreek Hill. I want to talk just a little bit more about what the injury was because I'm seeing a lot of people that are calling it a neck injury, and that's not particularly accurate here. What happened to Tyreek Hill was he had his collarbone at the SC joint on the part near his sternum, not the AC joint on the shoulder side. It dislocated and it came and put itself right behind his sternum. It's called a posterior dislocation. And there are, look at your head. You've got your veins and your arteries that go up right to the side and feed your brain. Those run right by that joint. So that's why he had to go to the hospital. That's why he's going to be out for a while because it's really, really a dangerous injury. If you do any arterial damage in that area of your body, you can end up in a very vital situation.
I mean, that was about the best breakdown I've heard that wasn't done by Dr. David Chow or.
I mean, I got some of it from him. I did have to go online and look up exactly what it meant, but I like to keep people informed on these kinds of injuries because there's so much of this echo chamber is just talking about things that totally aren't true.
Yeah. Anytime you talk about dislocation near your sternum, that's bad.
Yeah. It's scary as all hell.
You're in a position where that impacts the way you breathe. And that's a big deal. That makes sleeping hard. There's a lot that's going on there. So no, but I really enjoyed the explanation there. I just wanted to give you a little bit of praise right there on the air.
Thanks, Jeff. They are saying that Hill could be a candidate for IR still. I don't know if that's true. It could be 4, 6, 8 weeks. And we've seen guys miss whole seasons with this injury. So I think they're just waiting to see how it responds in that first week of healing. Something to keep your eye on. Definitely throw him on your IR. I think he's going to be back this year, but keep an eye on it. Could be 4 weeks, could be 10, could be the whole season. We don't know. All right, next up, we've got Nick Foles. He broke his clavicle, had surgery on it. We're looking at 6 to 8 weeks here if everything goes as planned with the recovery.
Yeah, he's gone. He's not coming back this year.
Why?
Because my man, Gardner Minshew, just took his job. Minshew. Murph, that's for you, buddy.
That's for you, Murph. We'll see you next week. I'll play it for you then, too. Don't worry.
His ears are bleeding right now. No, here's the thing. I mean, Foles will be back in 8 weeks. I mean, he's a pretty robust and tough guy. I expect him to at least be fully recovered and ready to go when he comes back, or at least when his time on the IR expires. But if we see 2 more really solid starts of Gardner Minshew, this is a situation where he really could be at risk of not getting this job back. When you're talking about a rookie who comes in as a late rounder, goes 22 of 25 against a decent defense. I mean, the Chiefs aren't good. I mean, they're probably somewhere in that, 20 to, I don't know, maybe 16 to 22 in terms of overall defense at the end of the year. But he came in and chewed him up and spit him out. Like, I thought that was really, really good. We'll see how he performs, but I'm not looking forward to Nick Foles coming back, to be honest.
I'm not really either. I think that, I mean, I'm not that thrilled about Minshew's performance. On paper, it looked awesome, but they were giving him some pretty easy throws. He had some pretty wide open windows. So let's just see how this goes going into week 2 before we start crowning this guy. But I'm excited to watch it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I watched that game quite a bit because I have 2 games going at any given time when I'm sitting down on Sunday. And, he had a few wide open throws, sure. And those were the kind of the highlight throws. But the ones that you didn't get to see were a few really tight window throws where he had to put some gas on it to get it into a spot. And he did just that. And he made some guys like DJ Chark and Conley and them look good on, third down throws. It's 3rd and 4, 3rd and 5, and he's zipping one in there, right past a defender for a first down. There were some gutsy plays that were in there. He had the one interception, but, hey, if you're giving me 275 and 2 with a pick in your first NFL start as a rookie with no real preseason prep, in terms of starting reps, man, I'll take that. That's really impressive stuff.
Yeah, I was really impressed with his arm strength because we're not looking at a Nick Mullins situation here. Gardner Minshew can get it down the field and he can get it outside the numbers.
Oh, absolutely. The kid's bringing a fire hose to the party.
All right, this one sucks. This next one on the list, Hunter Henry, tibial plateau fracture. This is the same injury that Aaron Rodgers had last year that he played through all season. And this is also the same injury that JJ Watt had the previous season. So we're looking at a wide range of outcomes here. It's a lot about pain and also about the severity of the break. David Chow was saying 4 to 6 weeks. I think that it could be longer than that, and also it could be shorter than that, but that's a pretty good estimation of how long we're going to see Hunter Henry out for. Jeff, I traded Hunter Henry this morning along with Tyreek Cohen for Miles Sanders. What do you think?
Man, that's rough. If I would have made that trade with you and then that injury news came down, I would have been furious.
Here's the thing. I accepted it well after the injury news came out, and I waited for like 2 hours just to see if the trade was going to get canceled. You snooze, you lose, man. I clicked accept on that thing after about 2 hours of the news.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, and if it was offered to you and you accepted it, I mean, it's up to them to pull. They have to pull the offer at that point. Like if you had gone out and said, hey, I'll give you Henry and this guy for that guy over there, and then they find out about the injury after the fact, then it's a little bush league. But it sounds like you were offered, which is totally on the up and up.
I was offered. And also, I'm not the guy that's going to run to my trades to accept an offer when we get injury news. I just think that's a bush league way to play fantasy football. Sure. I think it's gaining an advantage over your opponent in a way that it's not you being more skillful. It's not you having a better evaluation of players. It's just you being opportunistic and not opportunistic in a good way. So that's not what I did here, and I don't encourage you to do that either. You know what I'm saying?
Well, absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that as people listen to this, they understand the situation too, because we don't encourage people to play in a shady sort of manner. It's having a little bit of gamesmanship is fine, but don't be the prick in your league that's being shady and trying to pull a fast one on somebody.
Sure, because I don't know about you, but I have leagues that have been around for 5-10 years. And you're getting kicked out of leagues like that if you do that kind of thing. Like, people don't want you around anymore, and they'll just fail to call you the next year for the draft. So that's where I'm at on it, and that's the way I treat people that play fantasy football like that too.
There you go. That's all you got to do.
All right, next up on this list, Tevin Coleman. Tell me about Tevin Coleman, Jeff.
We're talking another ankle sprain here. It's going to be a few weeks, apparently. Anytime I see ankle sprain, I don't care if it's high, low, mid, these things just always seem to linger with running backs and wide receivers, because they spend so much time having to cut and pivot and plant. And I'm expecting this to be a 3 to 4 week injury. And so if you've got Matt Breida, it's got time to go ahead and ride him until he falls apart, and you've got to turn to Raheem Mostert.
Sure. I think it's going to be closer to a 50-50 split than people think, though. I think Raheem Mostert's going to get quite a bit of work. He looked good before his injury last year.
Yeah, he looked pretty good. The thing of it is he gets all the special teams reps too, and they need him on special teams too. So as much as they want to run him on offense and give him all those touches offensively, where it's almost like an inverted kind of a situation where normally you keep a guy fresh so he can play offense. They need to keep him fresh so he can be on special teams because he's one of their aces for that. I would fully expect the 49ers to be adding another back by, we're probably talking early part of next week if we don't get some good news on Tevin Coleman soon.
Sure. And they did say it was a high ankle sprain from what I'm hearing. So that could be even more like 6 weeks if things don't go quite as planned.
Yeah, the fact they haven't added a back so far, and I haven't even heard anything about anybody coming in for workouts, leads me to believe that it's probably not terribly severe. And that's why I'm looking at it's probably more like, it could be 3. And again, ankle sprains are so fickle, you just never know. I personally am not deeply invested in Tevin Coleman. I think I have him on one lineup, one roster. But, I am pretty deeply invested in Matt Breida. So,
yeah, I feel like this is good for us, but I never really like to cheer about injuries.
Sure.
All right, this last guy on here, we're not even totally sure that he's out this week. AJ Green, I'm hearing a lot of good things out of that camp about his progress. He's out of the walking boot. He's running on the field. He's not doing drills, but he's doing work on the side. What do you think about AJ Green?
This is a guy who's 31 years old and has a pretty serious chip on his shoulder. After being banged up last year, he immediately gets hurt this year. And, and of course, everyone's already talking about his untimely demise. I think he's pushing himself about as hard as he can to get back on the field yesterday. And I don't know if we see him this week, but I think week 3 is going to be where we finally get him back on the field.
I totally agree. I think that if you can still buy low on AJ Green, you should do it because he's a player that would come at a first or second round price tag if he was 100% healthy, even the way that he's been playing over the last 2 years. And if you can get a guy like that for a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round value in a trade, I'm doing it every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move into some of these questionable guys. We'll try and run through these a little quicker. We've got at running back, Mark Ingram. He's questionable. He had a shoulder. I think he's going to play, but it's something to keep an eye on. And Darius Geis is doubtful with that meniscus injury. He was saying that he hoped it was a meniscus sprain, and that is actually an injury that doesn't exist. So you might need to consult with his team physicians a little bit on that one. What are you doing with Darius Geis, Jeff?
I'm sitting him. And, and I'm just praying the guy gets healthy because I probably used some pretty legit draft capital on him in Dynasty. And, I need him to be on the field. So another knee injury doesn't bode well for him, though. I'm looking for him to get a handful of really good games under his belt by mid-late season, hopefully before the trade deadline. And I'm looking to shake him.
Absolutely. What about in redraft? Say you've got 6 bench spots, no IR. Are you considering dropping him?
Not yet. Just because the offense, according to, Jay Gruden, is going to run through him when he's on the field. So if he comes back in a week or 2 weeks and you get 4 weeks of him getting 18 touches, 20 touches, it's going to be enough for you to get some reasonable value. Sell him to a playoff contender, sell him to, if you're in Dynasty, sell him to somebody who, is looking for some young upside plays. You might be able to get something pretty decent for him at that point.
Sure, I'm not dropping him either. I think that if he does get past this, all the setbacks on the ACL recovery are behind him, we could be looking at a situation like we saw with Dalvin Cook last year, where he just comes on at the very end of the season, wins some people some championships with some playoff performances. But I'm not actually holding my breath. I think that there's a good chance that we find out there are more setbacks, there are more re-injuries, and he just kind of has a mess season, even if he plays. But, that's all conjecture at this point. There are a few more wide receivers here to talk about. So let's run through these. Sterling Shepard, concussion. If he plays, you play him unless you have something better, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Giants offense, they're still going to want to put the ball up when they're not handing it off to Saquon Barkley. And not having Shepard in the lineup, really does kind of leave the Giants in a bad position. So I fully expect for him, if he's near ready or ready, they're going to funnel him the ball as soon as he's back on the field.
Our breakout guy has a hip injury, Jeff. Did you see this? Marquise Brown?
I did see this. And, I don't know how serious this hip injury is. He's a limited participant. I feel like if it was really bad, they would have held him out. So it could be as simple as, he's just got a little soreness. Maybe he stretched something. Who knows? The NFL is so kind of, they lack forthrightness, we'll say, when it comes to injuries.
Secrecy is the name of the game.
It is. So I'm looking at Marquise Brown, and he'll be on the field. I expect that. And he'll probably play his 15 to 18 snaps like he did last week. And they're probably going to try and, catch the Cardinals sleeping and get them deep. But I think he'll be fine.
All right, next up, we got Trent Taylor, questionable with a foot. I don't think we're probably playing him anyway at this point, right?
No, he probably doesn't even need to be on your roster, to be honest. He's going to be one of those guys where he's going to get healthy. And with some luck, Pettis actually wakes up a little bit and they get him on the field. Because if Pettis gets back on the field and starts getting back into Kyle Shanahan's good graces, Trent Taylor's an afterthought. You're talking Kittle, Debo, Pettis, the backs. There's really not enough touches left for Trent Taylor. The 49ers offense isn't that prolific for the number 3 or 4 option to be relevant. And if Kittle's the one and you've got Debo / Marquise Goodwin or Pettis are the two, what's left for Trent Taylor? You could probably cut him.
Yep, that's where I'm at too. Next up, we got Mike Williams. Did you see that play where he went down?
I did not see that one. No, I was watching a different late game. I only had the Chargers on in the second half, I think, for some reason.
Yeah, he went down. He missed most of the fourth quarter and all of overtime. It's a knee injury. We don't have any specifics on what kind of knee injury. I've seen reports that say it's minor. It's just stiffened up early this week, and that's why he didn't practice on Wednesday. But he's a guy that you might be relying on. You might have him in your starting lineup. So this is a situation that you really need to watch going into the Thursday and Friday practice reports, because there's a chance he could miss. And without Hunter Henry out there for a few weeks, that could be terrible because he could be the red zone target.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope he plays. I've got a handful of rosters with him on there. And right now I'm planning as if he doesn't play, though, just because anytime you're dealing with a knee on a bigger bodied receiver, and the Chargers with their issues they've had in the past with guys like, Hunter Henry now and Keenan Allen, and keeping receivers healthy is the name of the game in LA. And if he's even got a twinge of something going on with his knee, they're probably going to sit him.
Totally agree there. Albert Wilson is up next. Questionable calf, more of the same here. Is there any reason to keep him on the back end of your roster at this point?
Some folks really love Albert Wilson. You got some real truthers out there for him. I'm not really one of them. I think he's a good player, and I think he's going to give you 1 or 2 big games this year because that's kind of what he does every year. But I'm not willing to smoke a roster spot when there's other, younger ascending players that I could go ahead and waste that spot on.
Fair enough. I think we can just move on from that one. I'm not holding him. I dropped him for other high upside wide receiver options just yesterday. So
there you go.
Next up, we got Tyler Lockett, questionable back. You actually added this one to the script, Jeff. Do you have any more information on this? I know it was added pretty late.
Yeah, so it was a late report. It popped up on Roto World, and I grabbed it. It came up 7:45 p.m. Eastern, and so it was a pretty late one for us. But it just looks like he's got a back. He did not participate today, and they're going to keep monitoring it. And if he doesn't get any reps in, obviously Thursday or Friday, there's a real chance that he could not play Sunday. And with Moore still out too, it could be Jaron Brown and DK Metcalf being your 1 and 2 options in no particular order for the Seahawks this weekend.
I think there is an order on that, actually. I think DK Metcalf proved last week that he is the number 1 option if Tyler Lockett's out, and maybe if he's not.
Sorry, I'm smiling really big right now because I didn't want to say that because I've been such a kind of a DK, that's my dude. I'm just trying to hide a little bit of my DK trutherism here. But if they're both out, if Lockett's out, Moore's still out, it could be a really big day and it could be a breakout party for DK Metcalf.
Or he could be seeing double coverage on every single play and get nothing. You never really know here.
And with his measurables, it'll be a chance to see if he's really that Batman level receiver that they were calling him at the combine.
Super excited to see that.
Yeah, me too.
All right, next up, we have some tight ends. I don't think that any of these are really guys that people were relying on as starters, so I want to run through them pretty quickly. We've got Trey Burton still with that groin. He was a limited participant in practice, and it's not really a groin. This is still related to that sports hernia surgery that he had, so I think they're just being really careful with him coming back. Jordan Reed, concussion, got a limited session in. He's a guy that, I'd consider starting him in a pinch if he does play, but you always have that one play injury concern. So what do you think about Jordan Reed, Jeff?
I dropped him. I've moved on. It's, I wanted really badly for him to finally stay healthy this year and put up some digits and be the guy we kind of have longed for him to be for his whole career. But, I went back to the old mainstay, give me some Vernon Davis, I don't think they're going to rush Jordan Reed back, given this is his 6th documented concussion. I mean, it's getting to the point now where is getting back on the field really in his best interest? And somebody probably needs to have that conversation with him if they haven't already.
Agreed. The last guy I have on this list, Jeff, is Tyler Kroft. I don't think that this is a situation where anybody was starting Tyler Kroft. He's basically irrelevant, but they have been using the tight end quite a bit in that Buffalo offense early through the preseason and week 1. So he was projected to be the starter. He's just a guy that I'm saying, keep your eye on it. He's back with limited practices. Just see what happens, because you might want to add him as a streamer later in the season.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head. That's really all you have to say about Tyler Kroft.
Exactly. All right, let's move into the guys that are likely to play. I just want to mention them because people are probably panicking when they see guys like Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson showing up on injury reports. Mm-hmm. I think these guys are all likely to play. Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Ted Ginn had an illness. DeAndre Hopkins actually was limited with ribs, but he pretty much has to be in a coma to not get on the football field on Sundays. We've also got Kiki QT. He was a full participant in practice. I think he's coming back this week. I don't know if he'll be a healthy scratch or not. That offense looked pretty good without him. And then we've got Jimmy Graham and Greg Olsen with a finger and back respectively. I think all these guys are going to play, but when it's a back and it's early in the week, pay attention to Greg Olsen tomorrow or today.
If you drafted Greg Olsen and he's on your roster and you didn't handcuff your tight end with Ian Thomas, who is a fantastic talent, and he's going to be great when Greg Olsen finally rides off into the sunset, you made a real big mistake, because you can't grab a guy who's pretty much been beat up all of the last 3 seasons and expect him to actually make it through the year at age, 34 now? Is that where he's at?
I think that's right. This is a mistake you can fix, though, because Ian Thomas isn't going to be owned in your league. If you have deeper benches, just go grab him right now, unless it's, full dynasty and somebody's stashing him for the future.
Right. I guess I'm in some leagues where it's a little bit deeper and guys are actually, landing 2 or even 3 tight ends in some cases because you have deep enough benches for that. So the waiver wire gets pretty skanky pretty quick. But yeah, if your number one guy is Greg Olsen, I would be prepared to sit him this week. Even if he's a full participant and he goes, you don't want to take a risk with a guy that may only get a handful of snaps, have that back tighten up on him on a Thursday night game, and you've got a dozen other guys you could have played on Sunday.
I think that you just came up with a new segment name there, Jeff.
What's that?
The skanky waiver wire ad.
I mean, it gets pretty skanky. I mean, no one likes the way that waiver wire starts to smell there. It's no good.
All right. Well, that is all that we've got for injuries. Keep an eye on all of these. Doing this show on Wednesday night, we don't have a whole lot of information. So really what we're trying to do with the injury roundup is empower you to be able to make the right decisions later in the week. We're not trying to tell you what's going to happen. We're trying to tell you what could happen and how to check it out. So let's jump into some cheap dates here, Jeff.
Okay, let's do it to it. I'm ready.
Cheap dates.
All right, I'll kick this thing off. First up at the quarterback position in my cheap dates is Josh Allen at 5,300 on DraftKings. 20 points last week. I think that's very, very doable against a bad New York Giants defense this week. I love the chemistry that we've seen with John Brown. I love that they're throwing the ball a little bit to the running back position in Devin Singletary. Give me all the Josh Allen this week in cash or in tournaments. I love the play. I think he's going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, I actually can dig that. The thing I'll look at, though, is if you're grabbing John Brown, you might take a look at Zay Jones this week. When you look at the wide receiver cornerback matrix on PFF, he's going to draw DeAndre Baker this week. And PFF views that as a big-time green light matchup for Zay Jones. But John Brown's got Janoris Jenkins, which is also a big-time green light matchup for him. So we could be looking at a little bit of a track meet for the Bills, take advantage of Josh Allen's arm strength, and just throw it downfield to those two guys all day long. I love that.
Yeah, that's what I'm going for. We're looking for long touchdowns, but John Brown actually had, I want to say, 10 targets in week 1. So that's the guy that I'm taking. But if you're going with a completely contrarian play in bigger tournaments, absolutely, I can get behind a Zay Jones play.
So I'm going to go a different direction at quarterback, and you already know who my cheap date guy is. I mean, I'm going to have to go with my... Every time. Oh, it kills me every time. Yeah, man, give me Gardner Minshew. He's cheap, right? So we're talking about a quarterback here who's playing in Houston. So you're in a dome, $4,800. It's a cheap buy on DK, super cheap at the quarterback position, to the point where you can pay up at other positions. There's enough speed and enough guys that can make something happen after the catch in Jacksonville. Now maybe he can actually get it to them so that we can see some of that. The tight ends will be worthless in Jacksonville this week, but man, we might see a little something out of Leonard Fournette. We might see a little something out of DJ Chark again, get D.D. Westbrook involved. It's an exciting time right now to see if he can live up to what he did last week.
I really like that play for tournaments. I think that it might end up being a little bit higher owned than people are expecting just because of how cheap Gardner Minshew is. He makes it so you can fit all the studs in your lineup if you stack a cheap tight end as well. But I love it. I think it's a nice play. He's a guy that I would definitely go with. Let's jump into the running backs, Jeff. Who's your running back?
I'm going Josh Jacobs here. He comes in at 4,700. He looked every bit the 3-down, workhorse style back the Raiders drafted him in the first round to be. Denver's defense isn't a bunch of schleps. They're a pretty good unit still, maybe a little long in the tooth in some positions, but the Raiders, they showed they could run the ball, and that's going to be a real big deal for Jacobs. And I think with his matchup, you're putting him, against Kansas City. Kansas City's traveling into Oakland. It's going to be a little bit of a shootout, but Jacobs can catch the ball out of the backfield too. And make no mistake, the Chiefs are going to be sitting back trying to cover the Wallers of the world and the Tyrell Williams and these other guys that can beat him on the back half.
Yeah, full disclosure, I would have picked Josh Jacobs too if he was available right now. We, after last week, created some rules on this thing with what happened in mind. So
Chris Carson Gate.
Yeah, Chris Carson Gate. So with that in mind, my pick is Chris Thompson. He's 3,900 on DraftKings. I love the play. I think it's one of the best plays at the value on the slate because he got 10 targets last week. If he gets you 8 catches, 80 yards, and a touchdown, he's going to hit 5 or 6x, not just 4x. And I think that his 3x is pretty much his floor. So I think he's one of the best cash plays out there.
Yeah, I like that a lot, actually, especially at that price point.
I don't even mind playing both of these running backs. Like, I would play Josh Jacobs first, but if you take Josh Jacobs and Chris Thompson, pop them both in your lineup, you can make elite plays all over the rest of your board.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I like the strategy behind that too, because if they can give you just enough to hit maybe 3x, 3 to 4x, then you're going to be in a really good spot with your wide receivers, your tight end, your quarterback, your defense, your flex, because you're going to have just studs all the way up and down.
And based on potential game script in PPR like DK is, we could see both of these guys hit 4x. It wouldn't be that surprising. To see Jacobs approach 20 points this week, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Chris Thompson approached 16, not surprised at all. I love both of the plays completely.
Same here.
All right, let's jump into wide receivers here, Jeff. My guy is not a cash play. He is definitely a tournament play. I don't have a whole lot of excitement about his floor, but his ceiling based on his air yards is astronomical, and that's James Washington. I've got him coming in at 3,600. That's almost a punt play at wide receiver, and this is a guy that had the third most air yards in week 1. That's a pretty predictive stat when it comes to wide receiver performance. It means he's getting the ball, and his average depth of target was 28.2. If he catches 2 or 3 of those 6 passes more than he did, we could be looking at a guy that everybody was talking about the new waiver wire hotness. So I'm encouraging people to go pick him up because he's been dropped in a lot of leagues. Put him on the back end of your bench. If you have a B on your team and you're looking for that high upside wide receiver play, I think he's the guy. But in tournaments, he's a pay down option that I really think could just absolutely smash. He could get you 5 or 6x if he has a good day.
Yeah, that's a really solid play. I just hope Ben looks better than he did against New England. I felt like he missed a few reads. He looked, and this might just be me, maybe my old man eyes here. He looked like bigger Ben. It looks like he's maybe packed on a few more pounds. Looked a little slower moving around the pocket. Like he didn't look quite as spry as he looked last year. So I'm hoping that maybe that's an anomaly. We start seeing him really put the ball where it needs to be and not miss those reads so he can find Washington downfield and make those big plays happen.
Hashtag preseason snaps matter?
I think they do. I mean, you need a few. Like, I'm not saying you got to play all 4 games, but I think it's important for starters to see at least a quarter's worth of work over the preseason, just to get the rust knocked off. I mean, you can see all the guys that were a little shaky in week 1, and there wasn't that many great games. There was close games, there were close scoring, but I wouldn't call it good football.
Totally agree. Like, look, Tom Brady is the guy that probably needs preseason snaps the least, and he took a lot of them. So that should tell you something right there.
Right, and he was sharp as a tack against Pittsburgh. He just shredded them.
Just straight film and quarterback play-wise, he was certainly the best quarterback in week 1.
You mean it wasn't Gardner Minshew?
No, it wasn't, Jeff.
I miss you.
Anything I can do to get that drop playing makes me happy.
We'll have to save it a little bit so that the listeners don't get tired of it before Murphy just tears his hair out, because that's the goal here.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's already ripped out a couple of patches worth, from the last episode. So,
who's your wide receiver, Jeff?
So I'm going to keep mine short. I'm going Miles Boykin here. We talked about the hip for Marquise Brown. The Cardinals, they already play some zone coverage, and I'm expecting them to be a little bit more off, a little bit more cushioned, especially when Brown's on the field. And that's going to leave some more space underneath for Boykin to get some work done. I think Lamar Jackson is for real on some level. I don't know if he's, 5 touchdowns every week for real. Maybe he gets a couple. I do expect some more designed runs, and I expect them to do some things to keep the Cardinals offense that ran 82 plays last week. Granted, I understand they had overtime and all that, but they ran 82 plays in 26 minutes of time of possession. The Ravens want to keep those guys off the field as best they can, and keep their defense fresh. So I'm looking for Boykin to catch a few passes underneath, pile up some yards. Maybe he doesn't get a touchdown, but it wouldn't shock me to see him go, 8 for 100 and just keep stacking first downs.
Probably a better play again in tournaments than cash here.
Absolutely. And I'm playing the upside as you should in tournaments. You're not playing floors, because he could also give you, 1 for 14.
Yep. It wouldn't surprise me at all, but it also wouldn't surprise me if he got 6 for 87 and 2 and just absolutely smashed.
Sure. Right. And again, now we're talking about on the top end of the scale here.
Yep. All right. Let's jump into some tight ends, Jeff. Who you got at tight end this week?
We talked about Jacobs and the Raiders earlier, and it kills me to go with 2 Raiders, but I got to go with Darren Waller because he's just criminally underpriced at 3,300. I got to take this guy. He's a primary target in the offense. It's him and Tyrell Williams. I absolutely expect him to see more touches this week. And, KC, they're going to put up some points. They're going to get theirs, and they're probably going to get a lead at some point. Oakland's going to have to throw it, whether they're throwing it to Jacobs, Williams, Waller. Some of these guys are going to put up some points. And so those primary Raider pass catchers might be worth stacking up this week.
Yeah, I actually have a stack in my cash lineup of Darren Waller and Tyrell Williams.
Boom, there you go.
I think that game is going to be a situation where they're going to be in a negative game script. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot. And those guys are the guys that I'm expecting to get the work.
Sure. And if the Raiders can keep the Chiefs off the field early by utilizing Jacobs on first and second down, there might be a situation where they can at least mitigate some of that damage and it doesn't get ugly until, middle third quarter. But my expectation is that Jacobs is going to see a few carries, a few targets. He'll be dangerous. And then Waller's going to see a stack of targets.
Sure, he got 8 in a pretty slow-paced game against the Broncos in week 1 on Monday night. So that's
right.
A play that I really, really like. My guy is all dependent on if Jordan Reed plays. You can tweak your lineup. So this is a situation in DFS that you can take advantage of. I'm going to go Vernon Davis if Jordan Reed doesn't play. I think he's a really solid play. He gets targets in that offense. I want to say he got 7 last week. So he's a guy that I'm really all over if Jordan Reed is out. And I'm just going to preface it here because if Jordan Reed is in and he gets through the concussion protocol, I'm going to take Jimmy Graham. He looks like he's pretty heavily featured in that offense, and it's a decent matchup.
Yeah, I can dig that. And not that I'm wishing, more injury on Jordan Reed, but I hope he sits. And I hope he sits for his own well-being. I think I've made that pretty clear. But I love the Vernon Davis play if he does sit. Jimmy Graham, I think, makes for a solid play also. He was surprisingly well used against Chicago, and he was targeted quite a bit. Even on passes he didn't catch. I was just shocked at how often Aaron Rodgers was looking his way. So, yeah, I think either one of those guys could make for solid plays.
I will say this, though, that Darren Waller at 3,300 to me is a better play than Vernon Davis at 32. If Vernon Davis was sub 3, I might think about saving that few $100 just so I could pay up somewhere else. But if I'm playing, and in my cash lineup I am, Waller is my guy this week too.
Well, I mean, I do what I can. I try to bring some goodness to the table here for you.
I mean, as long as you keep mentioning Gardner Minshew, we're solid. We're solid.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to hit the drop. I waited.
I miss you.
Sometimes they take a sec. All right, you got anything else to add on this, Jeff? Any other plays for DK?
I actually built an entire lineup in DK with just cheap date plays. And some things I found that I liked was actually A.J. Brown against the Colts. I like DJ Chark, sticking with the Minshew theme here against Houston. And I've got Tyrell Williams in there. And then how about the 49ers defense? I really love them getting after Andy Dalton. The back half, I don't think they're going to get 3 picks again. I don't see them blowing up Dalton like they did Winston. But man, that front four, I think they left a little bit on the table last week. They've got something to prove. They stayed in Cincinnati or in the Ohio area, so they're not going to deal with the travel nonsense this week. I really like what the Niners can do against the Bengals this week.
Shout out to our buddy Mark Wemkin. He called the Niners a slate winner at DST last week, and I was laughing at him when I was editing the episode. Turns out they were, so I'll take my lumps where I have to. All right, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Murphy will be back next week when we do our week 2 review of all of the things that happened. We'll probably do that during the game on Monday night. For Jeff at NFL_DiMatteo, Murphy at MurphyFFT, and myself at Human Stat Sheet on Twitter. Have a good one, guys. Later.
Happy week 2.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Takeaway Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow the show on Twitter at FF Takeaway.